my own short presentation today will focus on poetic inscriptions accompanying paintings and sometimes completely independent compositions. It's important to recall that in a culture, as described by Professor Shirane, where poetry is revered, there was also an admiration for the poets themselves, and that became one of the major pictorial themes of rimpa artists. And you can see both upstairs here and also at the Japan Society Hoitsu exhibition, which just opened yesterday. The theme of poets, which had been prevalent from ancient times, is revived by rimpa artists, but in a different way. Traditionally, you had independent poet portraits, but then Ogata Korin had the idea of creating group portraits of the 36 poetic immortals, the Sanju Rokasen. And you see artists such as Ikeda Koson or Kamisaka Sekka, and please look at these paintings more carefully upstairs, creating dramatic group portraits of the famous poets of antiquity. And even in the early 20th century, we can see renditions of this rimpa pictorial theme rendered in the medium of textiles. But what I would like to focus on just briefly before we have a demonstration of calligraphy is the way that calligraphy can interact with a composition. For instance, upstairs there's a very small painting, a shikishi or poem card taken from an album, and it shows the quintessential style of Sotatsu working in a very colorful mode, and he's taking the poem from the Issei stories, Issei Monogatari, and just looking at the poem, the poem is taken from the Issei stories, but the way it's rendered, starting with the Suruga Naru, Utsu no Yamabe no Utsutsu. Look at how the opening register of the poem is actually rendered in these scattered columns, and the diagonal registers of the poem are actually echoing the pictorial composition. Now, when we look at this composition by Sotatsu, it's a reminder that the poem should not be seen as a distraction. And in this example as well, by Karasumaru Mitsuhiro, you have the columns once again staggered to create an attractive composition. And all of these works are upstairs with the full translations, but you can see that the calligrapher is imposing a new style of readability, or on a new pace of reading on the poem. And in this case, Mitsuhiro, a courtier calligrapher, is remarking that his own life, or the life of a courtier, is like the water bird bobbing up and down between the waves, sometimes seen, sometimes invisible, but the courtier in the early 17th century continues on. And please take some time to look at this magnificent 6-panel screen. The screen is as tall as I am, by courtier calligrapher Konoe Nobutada. And here we have perhaps for the very first time, a calligrapher taking the 31-syllable court verse, the waka that Professor Shirane spoke about, and we have a 31-syllable poem being rendered in a full panel, and each of these is by a famous female poet of antiquity. But even without trying to decipher the archaic scripts, you can experience the energy, the dynamism of the calligraphy done in this large-scale format. This was the innovation of Konoe Nobutada. The name that is often brought up as one of the founders of the rimpa aesthetic is Honami Koetsu. And if I were asked, when did rimpa begin? We might say that it's at the time of the collaboration, the artistic collaboration of Honami Koetsu and Tawaraya Sotatsu, when these two artists of like sensibilities, wealthy townspeople, were collaborated on illustrated hand scrolls, with Sotatsu doing the underpainting, or sometimes his studio creating the paper decoration, and then having Koetsu inscribe in his dynamic calligraphy based on the study of ancient styles, but then presented in a new flamboyant way that became its own distinctive style from the 17th century on. The example here, just of a single poem, is a very good demonstration of how Koetsu created a revolution in the presentation of Japanese calligraphy. When you go upstairs and you see this scroll, it's a diminutive poem card mounted on the most elegant fabric, probably from the late 16th, early 17th century itself, about the same time as the inscribed poem card, mounted with a Tsujiga Hana fabric. It makes it an object of delectation, and even from a distance, you're able to see how Koetsu inscribed this work, and you're standing from afar, you can see that even though we know poetry and is supposed to be inscribed top to bottom, right to left, you immediately perceive that something else has happened here. And I think you can immediately see that the brush must have started not on the right side, as you would expect, but in the middle of the composition. And those of you who can read Japanese will immediately perceive that this is the character for love. And so you think, when you see this, you're going to have a pleasant experience of a love poem. But just reading a little bit farther, the next character is she. And the she is rendered so expertly. It doesn't waver, and this is the extended character she, but then koi shinaba. And then all of a sudden, your mood changes. If I die from love, and ta, this is the character for adare, taganawa tataji. No one else's name than yours will be raised in blame. And then to continue reading the poem, we must move to the other side, and yono nakano, so people or society, tsune naku mono to, iwa nasu tomo. And so the love poem continues. If I die from love, no other name than yours will be raised in blame. But no doubt you'll just say, that's life. Nothing lasts forever. Now, other styles of calligraphy. Once you pay attention to the styles, you can see that Kenzan, the younger brother of Ogata Korin, worked in a brusque style, a different, completely different manner that resonated with his own painting style here on the autumnal theme of ivy that is turned red. And just a final image by Sakai Koetsu. And once again, we've looked at how Koetsu in the 17th century used the medium of calligraphy to change the pace of reading. And here we have an example of Sakai Koetsu, once again reminding us that you must go over to the Japan Society and see the exhibition of works by Koetsu and his primary disciple Suzuki Kiitsu, and see how in the early 19th century, Koetsu is keeping this tradition alive of the juxtaposition of text and image. And let me just mention that for deciphering this composition of arrowroot vines in the moonlight, once again, you must start in the middle of the page and continue all the way over here, Tsukizo Katabuku, and then this is Mitsuzane, the name of the poet. So once again, the art of scattered writing, or chirashigaki, is used to change the pace of reading and using the art of calligraphy in juxtaposition with a painting to create a special poetic effect, a new aesthetic dimension to the poem. And let me just conclude by translating the poem to explain how the poem, the inscription, can transform the way you read a painting. Mitsuzane wrote, "Like the colors of the blossoms, my bitterness," the urami, the bitterness over love remains unseen till the depths of night, when moonlight slants down upon leaves of arrowroot vines. And so the poet is suggesting that bitterness over lost love doesn't come to the surface until late at night when you're all alone. The same way the brilliance of the flowers and blossom are only seen most brilliant in the depths of night when the moonlight comes down. A beautiful image, very serene, has been transformed by the poetry that surrounds it. To conclude today's presentation, what I would like to do is invite our guest calligrapher, Fumie Yamada, to come out and give a presentation of calligraphy showing how the process works. Fumie Yamada moved to New York in 2003. She was trained in classical kabuki dance and tea ceremony, flower arrangement. But today I would like her to show us examples of calligraphy, which she's been studying for many years. She started at a very early age. Her mother was a scholar of Genji, the tale of Genji, Yoko Iwai. She was a master calligrapher, and she is trained in calligraphy, and I've asked her to pick a few poems on autumn and winter themes to demonstrate the process of calligraphic inscription. Please join me in welcoming Fumie Yamada. Fumie has brought various examples of tsugishi. This is collage paper of the variety that was developed during the Heian period and then became exceedingly popular in the 17th century when Koetsu and other calligraphers were working. She is using traditional techniques, a suzuri, inkstone, and the ink stick. She has, you can see the bunshin, the weights to hold the paper in place. And I've asked her to inscribe some examples of traditional waka, which, as Professor Shirane mentioned, is court poetry written in 31 syllables of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllables respectively. And I'll first ask Fumie to show us an example of calligraphy that does not employ scattered writing or chirashigaki, but rather an example of calligraphy that shows the original structure of the poem in 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5, 7, and 7. Fumie, could you read the poem for us slowly so people can read along?
白鯛の袖の別れに露落ちて身にしむ色の秋風ぞ吹く
Now, please notice the collage paper is a background, and even though there might be floral themes or seasonal themes in the paper, as was the case in the early 17th century in examples by Koetsu, there's often no direct correlation between the background design and the calligraphy. But the calligraphy does naturally interact with the designs of the paper. Now, there is the kinds of calligraphy here is mostly in kana, the Japanese phonetic syllabary, but it is mixed with kanji, for instance, for tsuyu, and akikaze is a combination of kanji, Chinese characters, and the kana, zo fuku. So to create an attractive arrangement on the page, the columns here rendered in 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 are arranged harmoniously on the page, and also notice how there is a harmonious relationship between the two different writing systems, Chinese characters and Japanese kana calligraphy. Now, let's, Fumie, let's try another example using second one with a different disposition of characters. And you can see how a poem, a famous poem, perhaps a well-known poem, can be rendered in ways that change the pace of reading. And Fumie is selecting the sheet of paper she thinks might be attractive for the kinds of array of columns. And I should point out that Honami Koetsu and his contemporaries had studied traditional court calligraphy, as has Fumie, models based on following Heian calligraphy styles.
Should I read it?
Can you read this one?
高砂の松も昔になりぬべし、なお行く末は秋の夜の月。
Now, can we put the two examples side by side that you just did so people can see the first example and can we put these side by side?
Okay, yes. It's
and
not
okay, just
dry yet.
oh, okay. Now, when looking at these two examples, and I should the first example, autumn poem, the translation of when we parted, dewdrops fell down on my sleeves of pure white hemp. Your coldness harsh as the hue of the piercing autumn wind. Now, so the poem is rendered in just in 5 columns. Here you can see how it's scattered on the page, and the example of Takasago no Matsumo. So Takasago, referring to the pine tree of Takasago, a place in modern Hyogo Prefecture. Takasago is rendered in Chinese characters, and then the character for Matsumo, and then Mukashi rendering a long, elongated character for she, Mukashi ni narinu beshi. And then when we go up here, now, yukusue wa, and then, let's see, the final characters here, aki, aki no yo no tsuki. So it's the idea that the pine of Takasago, so this tree can grow older and has been with us since ancient times, but the the moon of an autumn evening is a companion that can be with us always. And perhaps this is a very appropriate poem for today because this is actually the full moon tonight, and if the weather clears, perhaps you'll be able to enjoy it. Now, look at how the poem is disposed across the page, and then the character for moon has its own column, and it does invite you to reflect on the shape of the moon in the sky. And let's try another example, Fumie, perhaps of a winter poem.
Sure.
Could you read this poem
Oh,
as well?
sure. I forget about that. 寂しさに耐えたる人のまたもあれな。いおりならえむ冬の山里。
Now, in this case, and let me mention, these are ancient poems. The first poem was by Fujiwara no Teika. The second was by Jakuren, one of his contemporaries. And this poem is by the monk poet Saigyo. And the poem is this example right here. We have, you can see the columns of the poem, the 5-7-5-7-7 composition has been completely ignored to create a set of poems that takes the first half of the poem, the kaminoku, and separates it from the second half, the kaminoku. And look at how the final character here is just right here. Just a single kana character, to, has become its own column. And the poem, if we look at the entire sheet from the beginning and look at these elongated, the sabish sani, the opening characters of, it's saying the character, if sabish sa ni tai taru shito no mata mo arena, if only there were someone else willing to bear this loneliness. So that's the first half of the poem. If only there were someone else willing to bear this loneliness. And then the second half by this monk poet, he's writing, the iori narabemu fuyu no yamazato. Side by side, we'd build our huts for winter in a mountain village. And so the poem is capturing that feeling of a monk who is rejected the life of the city, living in absolute isolation, but then the idea to have two huts side by side in a mountain village in the winter. The poem has separated the space of the two parts of the poem, and so that isolation expressed in the poem is manifested in its presentation. And perhaps, Fumie, one final winter poem, perhaps.
Finally.
Can you read this poem?
Oh, sure. I always forget.
Just once again.
旅人の宿りせむのに霜降らば、我が子を育め、雨の立つ村。
Now, did you see what has happened in the poem here, similar to what I showed in the case of Koetsu? You start the poem in the middle of the page, and then one long column here, and then the poem and the inscription ends down here all by itself. And this is a poem from the Manyoshu, an anonymous poem. It's if the shimo is here, if frost should cover the fields where my son Wagako is traveling, is seeking shelter, Yadori Semu, as a traveler, and then the poet, she says, please, ame no Tazumura. So you, flock of cranes of the heavens, please cover him with a cloak of feathers. And so the poem is by an anonymous female poet from the Manyoshu. The poem is rendered in Shirashigaki, and then look at here. This is kana, the character for no, and for ra, and this little final section here balances the composition, but using kana characters that at first glance look like Chinese characters. And so highly cursive Chinese characters are being used phonetically. And so overall you have the composition. And so once again, we have an example of a poem rendered by a calligrapher who can transform the reading process and create a level of emotion, create an aesthetic level using decorated collage paper, as we see here, to create a new reading of the poem. Fumie's calligraphy is based on the study of ancient models, but she has brought a modern sensibility to it. This is exactly what Honami Koetsu was doing in the early 17th century. It now just remains for me to invite you to go up to the galleries one more time today and hopefully again until early January. And I hope the presentations today by Professor Shirane, Professor Lippert, Fumie Yamada have given you new insights into the literary contexts of the works in the exhibition. They've given you a new insight into the ink painting techniques, the role of calligraphy in the culture of rimpa. And I also should mention that if you go up to the galleries today and take a peek, we also have a special ikebana exhibition reminding us the importance of flower arranging, the arranging of flowers in these stylized arrangements was very much popular in the early 17th century and has been popular since. And just as a final reminder, do visit the Japan Society exhibition, Silver Wind, the Arts of Sakai Hoitsu. For if you visit the Hoitsun Kiitsu exhibition in conjunction with the exhibition upstairs at the Metropolitan, you will have a very special opportunity to see one of the finest arrays of rimpa art ever assembled in the West, and even one of the best anywhere in the world. I would just like now to thank our speakers and Fumie Yamada for a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.